Good morning. Today we're going to go over this week's assignment, which is due Friday. We are looking at page 16 of the Leonardo papers. So yes, we did skip a few. So we're not going to do pages 14 and 15 just because they require a color media. And as we stated before, we know not everyone has color medias at home. But this one here, the neutrals page, there's several ways you can do it. For those of you with color media, I'm going to go over that first. And then for those of you without color media, I'll talk with you about how you can show examples of neutrals. It won't be the same experience because this is going to use what we just talked about with complementary colors to make neutrals. So if you don't have color media at home, you're not going to get that same experience, unfortunately, but you can still represent neutrals in different ways using different materials. So this is what page 16 looks like. It says more on color at the top. As you can see here, it's going to continue from page 15, but since we're not going to do that, what you need to realize is on page 15, what they were having you do is choose two complementary colors. Remember, complementary colors are opposite each other on the color wheel. And once you chose those, you're mixing a little bit of one complement into the other and recording it to see what happens to the color as you add complementaries. Eventually, when you get enough of an even mixture of your complementary colors, it's going to create a neutral. So a neutral is, of course, your browns, your blacks, your grays, and so forth, okay? So that's what we're going to do on here. So for those of you with color media, you would first choose one color. You're going to mix some of the complement into it, and you want to reach a neutral color, and then you're just going to continue that same practice 5 more times to see what your different complementary mixes, what kind of neutrals they create, okay? So I, of course, as usual, work on separate paper. What I did for this to prepare for it was I took a piece of paper and I found a shape. So I didn't have anything oval to copy the ovals from page 16, but I did have a circle. So I took this lid and all I did was lay it on my paper and trace it 6 times, okay? And I just continued to do that until I had 6 circles on here. Let me grab my sheet of paper I already have prepared. Okay. And this is what I'm going to use to record my complementary colors. So I'm going to first demonstrate, for those of you who have watercolors, I'm going to demonstrate using watercolors. What you don't want to do if you have color media, and this is going to be based on what you turned in for your color wheel, you don't want to use the already created neutrals in a palette of color paints or of color pencils or of crayons. You want to experiment mixing the complementary colors together to create a neutral. So do not use the browns, the blacks, the grays, anything in your sets of pencils, crayons, or paints that are already a neutral. You want to experiment with making your own, okay? So the easiest ones to start out with are your primary colors and secondary colors. So you do have a choice here in creating your colors. Make sure I have the right orange there. No, I don't. Okay. I want this one. So this time I will allow you to use your secondary colors in a paint set, pencil set, crayon set. Whereas remember when we did the color wheel, I asked that you created them, mixed them. So remember, if you're working with watercolor, you want to first get some water onto your colors to help get that paint to soften up. And for this, I may need to either make green, or I'll check my other palette here to see if there's a green color on here to use as secondary green. Yes, there is. It's one nice thing about these sets. I'm using the Grumbarker watercolor sets. The nice thing about them is you can buy the separate pans like this, and they just snap in and out. So I'm going to use this green for my secondary color green. Okay, so I have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple, all with some water in those. And I'm going to choose one of these complementary sets. So I'm going to do red and green first. I'm going to pick up some red paint. Going to, like we did making the color wheel, scrape some of that paint off into my palette. Get a little more water here. Okay, so once I have that, then I want to get some green into my palette. I'm going to kind of hold on to it here since it is on its own. Don't want it tipping over. Okay. Now that I have some green, clean out my paintbrush. And I'm going to have red as my base color. So just kind of give you an idea, and you don't have to do this, but to give you an idea of what we're doing here. This is red normal. Okay. I'm going to pick up a little bit of green here, mix it into the red. And this is what you would have done on page 15. And then what you'll notice is each time I add the green to it and record that red color, and what you may be noticing in the palette also is that red is getting darker. So remember, we mentioned that complementary colors being opposite each other on the color wheel, they will lower the intensity of each other. They kind of darken each other. They take away the brightness. They neutralize each other. So as I keep on adding green here to my red, it's going to become darker and darker. And what I want is a neutral color. So I'm looking for something that's going to be a gray or a brown-like color. Now, usually with your red and green mixtures, you usually get pretty close to a gray more than a brown. So that's what I'm looking for here. That's not too bad. So, you know, if you are working with paints and you want to make that little recording over here, you know, it's kind of neat to see how those colors change and how drastically this bright red can darken into these maroons, eventually until you get into these grays, just by simply adding green to it. So once I have a color I'm happy with for a neutral, I'm going to record it onto my paper. And again, I'm not using watercolor paper, so it's not going to absorb the color nicely. In fact, I'm kind of running out of color here. So I want to get that spread as much as possible into my circle. Fill it up. And I'm going to label this as my red and green. Okay. So that's one neutral. So now I have to make 5 other neutrals. So I know I can get at least 2 more using just my primary, secondary, complementary. So you may want this worksheet from last week. So I used red and green. So now I'm going to try orange and blue. So in my palette again, I'm going to pick up some orange paint, move it over to my palette. Going to definitely get a little bit more than before, just because I did run out there near the end trying to paint my shape. You don't want too small of a shape when you draw them if you're not doing it in the packet. I want my complementary color to orange, which is blue. I'm going to turn my palette around here so I'm not dropping blue into my other colors as I get some over here to my palette. Okay, so now that I have some blue, again, I'm going to start with a clean brush so I can control how much of the complement I'm adding. So again, you don't have to do this, but if you want to check your color as you mix it. I forgot to put a swatch of orange there, but since it's pure orange, I can go back to my palette and do that. You'll notice certain colors will color faster than others. So blue may tint orange a little bit faster. Orange is definitely a little bit lighter than red. So you may find that you come across that neutral quicker. And just what you want to be careful of, which I just did there, is I went a little bit beyond. So I don't know how well that's showing up, but see how that kind of looks greenish now? Because now I got too much blue into my mixture. So you do have to be careful when you're mixing up complementaries, in that it is possible to go too far with adding the complement and just creating the darker colors on the opposite side. So, you know, we're here where I added green to my red to darken it. I can add red to green to make darker greens. So when I reach my neutral here, if I kept on adding green to that mixture, eventually more green's going to be in there than red, and it's going to start with your darker greens and eventually start brightening up the more green I add into it. So that's what happened here, was I got too much blue. So I'm going to have to start with another little bit of orange here. Mix it in. And I'm afraid blue just might be a little bit too strong for it. So I may have to go back and start all over with a fresh well of orange paint. But we will see here. All right, so they say we're pretty close. Now, orange and blue, you are going to get a little bit more of a brown color. You tend not to get too much of a gray neutral with orange and blue. So if you try for the gray, you know, it depends on the orange and blue also, just like when we talked about mixing secondaries like your purple last week. Sorry, 2 weeks ago. Depending on the colors you have, so depending on the color of orange I have, the color of blue I have, I could possibly get a little bit more of a gray tone than this brown tone. But typically, orange and blue make more of a brown neutral. So I'm going to label this one as my orange and blue. And then I'm going to go with my next pure set. So that's going to be my yellow and purple. So this one of all of them is the one where you really, really want to watch how much of the complement you add, because you're of course going to start with yellow. Yellow being one of the brightest colors, one of the lightest colors we have. It's of course going to get dominated by something like purple, which is a very deep, dark color. It's going to be overcome with violet very quickly. So you do want to be careful here in how much you mix into it. And again, usually with a purple and yellow complementary mix, you're going to get more of a brown than you are a gray. Oops. There, Miss Barnett wasn't even looking where she was dipping her paintbrush. I was checking my screen to make sure we were still in focus. Okay, so now that I have some yellow, I'm going to again turn my palette around here so I can get some of this purple into it. All right. So now that I have some yellow and purple here, I'm I'm going to now add purple to yellow. So this is how you can get those nice deep gold mustardy yellows, is by adding purple to it. Try a little bit more purple in there. And, you know, sometimes you do need to go beyond that point of the midway neutral, because you want to be careful not to stop too soon, because you don't want it to look too much of one color over the other. And you'll notice that, you know, there's a difference in the brown you create with your purple and yellow compared to the brown that was created with your orange and blue, compared, you know, and I should say neutrals instead of just browns, compared to the neutral you make with your red and green. So that's what it wants you to do here, is experiment with your different complementary mixtures to see what kind of neutral you are going to create. And just so you can see here, I did forget to swatch the original colors up here. Okay, so this one I then would again label yellow and blue. Sorry, purple. Oh my goodness, Miss Barnett looked up here and saw blue. It's definitely a Monday morning, isn't it? Yellow and purple, or yellow and violet. Okay, so now I have 3 more here. So I'm running out of room on my palette. So I definitely am going to try to use these colors I have here. So over here, I'll clean out where red was. Get a little piece of paper towel. And I'm going to refill some red in there. Okay. So if I go with one of my tertiary colors, I'm going to clean out my what used to be orange. Sorry, what used to be yellow. Refill that with yellow. I'm going to soak up what used to be orange here. And I'm going to create some tertiary colors here to create my mixes. So I find when I'm working with a palette, and if I want to clean it out, you know, to tear off bits and pieces here, clean up my palette instead of trying to take a whole paper towel and wipe it out. All right, so I need get more orange. laid into my palette. Now my watercolor set does have tertiary colors in it, as you can see. What I dipped into accidentally is my yellow orange here. I have a red orange. I have a blue green. But you know, this is one of the fun things about learning about color is learning how to mix colors. So let me get this loaded up here. And I want some fresh yellow in my palette. All right, so we'll start there. So I want to make a tertiary color here. So I'm going to start with one of my lightest ones, and that is yellow orange. So I'm going to take some orange, add it into my yellow. Okay, so now the complementary color to yellow orange is blue violet. So I'm going to add purple to my blue till I get a blue violet color I want. Okay, and then just like before, I'm going to add some of my darker to my lighter. So I'm going to add blue violet to my yellow orange. And I'm going to keep on adding some blue violet to yellow orange until I get a neutral color. So what you will notice is your tertiaries are going to take a little bit longer to get that neutral. Okay, so when I test it here, it's kind of a bluish green color. See here, if we have enough blue purple, might have to make up a little bit more. Definitely gonna need some more blue paint. That dragged over here. Get some more purple, put into the blue, and then add more of this to my tertiary mix. So we are getting a little bit deeper. So I'm trying to analyze my color there. And you know, sometimes it's a little hard to tell what they look like while they are still wet. I'm thinking it's getting a little bit too much blue. Going to add a little bit of orange to it. Test that out again. All right, so it's kind of looking like a gray color. Has a little bit of a blue tone to it. So now that I'm spreading it out, So I've added a little bit more orange to it now. Get it spread out. So it is kind of a gray color, still a little bit more of a blue tone to it. So it's one I'll have to play around with some more. You know, being on a computer paper, I only have so much leeway to play around with it. But I will mark this as my blue violet plus yellow orange. Okay, and then I'll let that dry and see what it may need adjusted some too. Because as you can see, it's soaking through my paper. All right, so next tertiary, I think I'll mix up some red violet here. So I'm going to pick up some violet, bring it over here to my red. And depending on the color of red violet you want, I like mine a little bit more violet than red. I'm going to go ahead and pick up some more, stir in, and I'm definitely going to need some more violet paint here. Okay, so starting with red violet, look at my chart. I need yellow green, so I'm going to need another source of yellow on here. Move that out of my way. Okay, so I'm going to pick up some green, mix it into my yellow, get my yellow green. Going to mix some of my red violet into my yellow green. Give that a little test. That might be a nice brown. And paint it on. Okay, once I have that one, going to, of course, label it as my red violet plus my yellow green. And that leaves me my last tertiary set. Let me dry my table a little bit. And my last tertiary set will be my blue-green and my red-orange. So, need to make red-orange here. There's some orange here. I'm adding red to it. And I'm going to get a little bit more green in my palette. And need some blue in there to make my blue-green. Now, blue-green is one of those colors where you can start with green, you can start with blue. I tend to like mine a little bit more towards the blue range than the green range, so I usually start with blue, but since I already had some green in the palette waiting to be used, I decided to add the blue to it this time. Okay, so now that I have blue-green, I'm going to mix it into my red-orange. Do a little test. Again, it's hard to tell while it's still wet, but it looks pretty good. Going to spread it on there. And as you spread it out, you know, it changes color slightly. These are definitely a little bit more deeper in the grays. Sorry, did not realize. Definitely a little more deeper in the grays than some of the other colors. So I'm going to label it as my, move my paints out of the way here so I have room. Okay, so I'm going to label this as my blue, green, and this is going to be plus my red, orange. Okay, so those of you with watercolors, that's what you're going to do. You're going to mix your complementary color sets. Oh, I see. One moment. Let's see why this. See why that quit working. There we go. All right, so you're going to work with your complementary color sets. Make sure you label what your complementary colors were that you mixed together. Again, you can do little swatches here to kind of see what happens as you make them, but I would definitely maybe test them out as you go. And then again, don't forget to label it. So this is color part 3. This is neutrals. And of course your name and period number. Okay, make sure it's labeled, upload your photograph, and that is the paint version. So for those of you who are using color pencils or crayons, you're going to again start out the same way with a circle here. Let me do a little cleanup here of my paints. Get those put off to the side. Now pull out my colored pencils. So again, Miss Barnett doesn't have crayons here at home, so she's going to use colored pencils. And it's going to be the same concept, but only it's going to be the layering process. So again, if I start out with my primary colors, and if you have the secondary colors in your crayons or colored pencil sets, there's my green. Get my orange sharpened. And I need to find my violet. There it is. So if I start out with my mixes, so if I start out red and green, for this, the green's a little bit lighter. So I'm going to start out with a layer of green. Going to lay over top of it a layer of red. And keep on laying over top of one another red and green until my neutral starts to appear. So with colored pencils, crayons, this will take a little bit more time. But they're already on, what, my third swipe of green. I'm already starting to get that gray to appear. And I like to go in different directions so that I'm filling in all those little nooks and crannies of the paper, so I don't have to do the circular shading motion, but I do like to move my paper around like this so that I am getting all those little nooks and crannies filled up. And just playing back and forth with red and green until I get a neutral. Something that looks kind of grayish or brownish in color. Okay, so one nice thing about doing this with color pencils, crayons, and I will, of course, label it. I'm just going to initial it right now, RNG for my red and green, is that you get that special look, move my palette here, that occurs with such materials, and that you can still see the red peeking through, you can still see the green peeking through, but the overall tone starts to look like a gray color. If it's too much of one or the other, then you know you need to go back over top with the other to try to neutralize that too much of that other color peeking through. Okay, so if I move on to my orange and blue, Same thing, start with a layer of color. Going to overlap it with its complement. And then come back and overlap again. And keep on layering until, again, I start to get that neutral color, that brown, gray color showing up to create my neutrals. Okay. And then again, label it. This is my blue and orange mix. Get my yellow and purple. Now purple, I will have to be really careful with how much I layer on. The very dark color compared to yellow. So I don't want to press too heavy with it. Just layer one over top of the other. Just to make sure I hit all the different directions, I do rotate my paper as I do this. Just to make sure I'm getting a solid color feel there. So very rarely with yellow and purple do you ever get a gray color, whereas in the watercolors, the orange and blue seemed a little more khaki color, a little more tannish color. And the color pencil here definitely has more of a gray tone to it. But there's yet to be a media that I've ever done this with in which I've had yellow and purple create a gray. It tends to be a more brown neutral. So I again label that as my yellow and purple. And then when it comes to your tertiary colors, I'm looking for my tertiaries here. So I'll need my yellow green. And I need a red purple. And I need my blue purple. And a yellow, and a yellow orange. So There's one. And then, of course, my last set is a blue-green. And, of course, red-orange. Pencil's just sliding everywhere. All right. Okay. So now that I have my tertiary sets, you can try mixing them with, I'm going to change out my red violet here. I like this one better. Okay, so you can mix your tertiary colors like we did before. You know, I can make my yellow-orange first and then layer the blues and the purples over top of it. But with color pencil crayons, if you had the tertiary colors, it is going to be a lot easier. So again, I'm going to lay down a layer of color. I'm going to cross over it with a layer of color. And keep on going until I've created a neutral color that I like. That's looking pretty good. I'd say that one of all of them so far has probably had the more grayish tone to it. So I am going to label it as my yellow, orange, and my blue violet, blue purple, whatever you want to consider it. Okay, we'll next go with yellow green. So this one's going to be a little more green than yellow in color. And I changed up my red violet here. Just putting some pencils that I'm done with away so they're out of my road. And of course, again, I can't stress enough, if you don't have color pencil, you would do this with crayon. And just keep on layering them until you start to get that neutral color. This one's definitely going to give me a little bit more of a brown neutral than a gray. Okay, so once I have that, those put away, label this. This was my red purple, red violet, plus my yellow green. And then my last one here, which is of course my red orange and my blue green. I have to say that's one of my favorite neutrals there. That was my red orange plus my blue green. And again, I would label it color part 3, neutrals. And again, my name and period number. Okay, so that goes over if you have color medias. So for those of you who don't have color medias, what you're going to do, you're not going to get the fun of experimenting with mixing colors, but you do still want to represent what neutrals are. So what I want to see is that you at least understand that neutrals are your browns, your grays, and so forth that you find. Not just by mixing complementary colors, but you know, you can buy brown paint, you can buy colored clothing that are in your neutral ranges and so forth. So you have a couple of options here when it comes to creating the neutrals without color media. And I again start with one of my sheets where I trace circles. Okay, so one option is collage. So what I spent the morning doing was going through newspapers, magazines, and so forth. And I was looking for areas where it shows, you know, a range of neutrals. So like newspapers are great, especially when you find ones that have black and white ads. So all I did was take my circle template again, trace over a section that I want to capture. I'm going to cut that out. And I always check the back first before I do this to see if maybe that was a better example. Okay, so either one of those could work, but it was a pretty big ad there. So if I want more of just this more solid gray tone with a little bit of black in it, I can use that later. You know, up here, there's the calendar. Here's a lighter gray. So that would be a good example of a neutral. So if I'm going to do the collage method, I want to find some different examples of grays and browns. So grays are probably going to be your easiest, like I said, if you have a newspaper, because a lot of it is black and white, gray print. And all I do is cut this out. I have a glue stick here. If you don't have a glue stick, you can use a little donut of tape to attach it. And I put the glue in the circle instead of trying to put the glue on the circle paper that I just cut out. And then I just lay this down and attach it. Okay, so what I found helpful is maybe when it comes to the brown ranges is things like magazines, like clothes ads and stuff. So like here's a shirt that is khaki. It's also on a neutral background. So even though not all of the shirt took up my circle, it's still neutrals being represented. And of course, the largest part of this circle is the khaki shirt. Okay, so once I have that cut out, again, I glue onto the big paper, lay it down, and attach it. Okay, so I've done one already. So I have some neutrals. Again, I labeled it neutrals. I put my name on it, need my period number. But I went through and I found different examples of neutrals in a clothing magazine. Or again, as I said, it can also be newspaper. So that is one way to represent your neutrals. The other is to use materials that maybe you've never thought of. So One is I can, of course, use pencil. Pencil is gray. I can come in here and use my gray pencil to create a neutral on my paper. So again, though, I like to, even though I'm not trying to color inside the lines, and you're not going to be required to use the circular shading technique on this if you use pencil, I still go in many different directions. I do try to slow up near my edges just to kind of keep it at a swatch within that circle. I go slightly outside the lines, that's okay. But I do just want to kind of keep it as neatish looking as possible. Okay, so that is, of course, one way. And again, I can label this one. If you want to label your collage one, you can put magazine, mag even. You could put newspaper, like this one was newspaper. You can label it the colors. This one has it on there, but this is khaki. These are grays. Okay, so this is tan. This would be more tans and browns. So just identify them as to the colors that they represent in the neutrals. Okay, so that's one material you can use. Another one is coffee. So you can brew very strong coffee. This is instant coffee, and I used more instant coffee granules than I did the water. So if you have a paintbrush, this, of course, will be a little bit easier to get it onto the paper. If you don't, maybe a cotton swab or a cotton pad could work. You could try the spoon, I guess, but you just want to be careful not to make a big mess by pouring a lot of coffee onto your paper. But coffee is a great neutral color when it comes to painting. And there are artists that actually make art using coffee as their paint. Now this is a thinner version. You can boil brewed coffee and make it thicker, and treat it kind of like watercolor even. But coffee just has a very nice, unique, neutral tone of those browns and stuff. Now this was a dark roast instant coffee, so if you have something that's more of a light roast, it might not be as dark as what mine ends up drying. Another neutral that you may be able to find in your house is tea. So I brewed some tea bags. I did like 4 tea bags for 4 ounces of water, trying to just get a concentration of tea in there. Again, I can use a paintbrush to apply that on. I could try to use the spoon. I could even use the tea bag to put it on. And I've had students even do this in the past to add aging looks to artwork. And we squeeze a lot of the water out, and you can come in and kind of tap with the tea bag. And it, of course, leaves the tea behind to stain the paper. Okay, so tea is another one. So let me get those labeled. So I have coffee. I have tea. Okay, another one I found, and that was because I was watering plants this morning, was a little bit of dry dirt would make a neutral. So let me move my drinking containers there. And so I took some dirt from my one plant, and I could take some of this dry dirt and smear it and grind it into my paper surface. You may want to do this outside if possible. What you don't want to do is make a mess, of course, with any of this. And just grind that dirt into my paper. Of course, I'll have to wash my hands when I'm done demonstrating to you all. But, you know, dirt there creates a different neutral tone on my paper. And then another one I found was pen and ink. So similar to what I did with pencil there, I can just come in. And again, if I go a little bit past my circle lines, that's okay. But I'm going to crosshatch inside this circle here several times to fill it up with a neutral looking tone. Now, one thing I haven't been able to find, I know I have it in my supplies somewhere in my house, is charcoal. Charcoal would be another great example of a neutral that you could use to apply to paper. Charcoal is one of my favorites, whether it's artist charcoal or if you have a charcoal furnace in your house. I know that's what I grew up with. My parents had a charcoal furnace to heat the house, so you know they would get loads of charcoal every year. And even at this time of year, there would still be possible remnants laying around. So I still need to find one more neutral for this one, which after I find my charcoal, I will apply. But then I would again label this. So my plan here is charcoal, but if I can't find charcoal, I'm going to try to come up with something else. So what I was even thinking is, you know, we were just talking about using newspapers. And I remember when I was younger, I used to deliver newspapers. That was one of my first jobs. And your hands would get really, really dirty from handling the newspaper a lot. So I'm going to try. Oh, yeah, that's working a little bit. And just rubbing the ink from newspaper off on here. And that would create a lighter neutral tone. Is it going to be really, really dark? No. But the ink can be rubbed off of the newspaper onto my paper to also represent a neutral. So it's a different way to use newspaper to and I'm going to label it newspaper ink because it's not the newspaper itself. It's more of the ink from the newspaper. And notice the more I kind of fold my paper over here and rub it in, it is starting to darken up some more. So it could be that I could get as much ink off of this section of newspaper, find one that has a little bit more black ink on it, and keep on rubbing it into my circle. But there, I've used newspaper then also as an option for creating a neutral. Okay, so color medias are definitely the best for this assignment. It's the purpose of the bracket to get you to understand how color works. That's why we start out with the color wheel, so you can see how colors interact with each other to create new colors. It's why we then went on to identifying complementary colors just in name only. And then finally to this stage where you're using complementary colors to create neutrals, whether it's a dry medium or a wet medium on your paper. But again, not everyone has color media at home. So at least identify what neutrals are. They're your browns, your grays, and so forth, and come up with a method to create examples of neutrals, whether it's a collage technique. This one at least will give you a little bit more fun, especially if you work with coffee or tea, to kind of experiment a little bit with a liquid medium. But, you know, even a dry medium that's not a traditional art tool like dirt, or here where I rubbed in newspaper. Okay, so that is this week's assignment, due on Friday. This is our last new assignment for the school year. After this, it will be makeup work. So we'll meet again next week. And if you have any questions about any of the past assignments, I will be here for you to answer those. And we'll get everything turned in for the end of the school year.